I got the divine inspiration to make a tiny little fimo clay pie figure the other day, and this video is going to be documenting how I made it, simple as that. Let's just get into it. So to make this little pie, we have to start with making a pie crust. But before we can do that, I'd just like to give advice on what to do when you're using fimo or other oven-baked clays, because something I had learned early on is that, well, first of all, you always wash your hands right before you sit down. Also, I find that a lint roller helps with reducing the amount of little fibers that get stuck in the clay, so roll it over your hands to get any extra towel lint off. I'm also using a silicone mat, but you don't need it. As an alternative, you can tape down some of this. I actually don't know what this is called in English. I call it sandwich paper. You know how there's parchment paper you use for baking, and then there's paper that you use for wrapping sandwiches? This is it. It's the kind that can't go in the oven. It's always good to cover your surface area to avoid stains that fimo can leave behind. So to start off, I have this piece of leftover clay for the crust from when I was making my prototype cherry pie, and I made that by mixing 3 colors: brown, white, and yellow. I mix mostly the brown one, a little bit of white, and a little bit of yellow to get a lighter brown clay. And something I also really like to use is a pasta maker for rolling out sheets of fimo. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just using this plastic fimo roller that you can buy at most craft stores. So I roll this out pretty thin, and once you have a thin piece here, it's just like a millimeter thick now in most places, you can cut out your crust. What I have here is these little cookie cutters that are perfect for fimo. And this type has this little sort of ruffled edge that's perfect for pie crusts. I'm going to shape the sides of the pie crust, and I do that with this double-ended tool. I actually don't know where this is from. My brother gave it to me. But it has this flat end here that I'm going to use, and this is where things can get a little finicky. You have to sort of make the edge raised, and that can get a little difficult because you have to sort of keep holding it up as you go along. The sides have to be able to stand on their own, at least until we can get some filling in the crust. You can see how it is standing up pretty alright, but it's still a little wonky, so you just have to gently shape it, trying to make it as circular as possible, and try to make sure that it's the same height all the way around. And now it's time to make some filling for the crust. And what I'd like to do is, because I've already made a cherry pie, I want to make a peach pie of sorts. So I thought that I would make little peach pieces. And I'll do that by first mixing some neon orange with a bit of white. I'd like to have a little bit more of an off-worldly color because it has to look sort of plasticky and perfect. That's how I like my pie. Now, if you ever have issues with blending your fimo together because it's too firm, then I really recommend doing this laminating method where you just put it together layer by layer, and in a few minutes it comes together like this and you have a homogeneous blend. So what I'm going to do is I really just make little balls for the filling. Roll little balls in various sizes, but try not to make them too big. I'm going to fill the whole pie crust up with these little guys, so I'm going to have to make a lot of these little balls. They don't have to be perfectly uniform, they just have to be sort of fruit-shaped. You know, peaches can also be quite small. The peaches we have in our greenhouse are teeny tiny, smaller than the palm of my hand, and I've made pies with them. They tasted amazing. So yeah, you just have to keep going like this for a pretty long time until you end up with a small army of balls. How many times am I going to say balls in this video? We'll just never know. So now that I have a bunch of little guys, I'm going to see how I can arrange them. So I pick up my crust carefully and I fill it with the halved peaches. This is also a blade that's meant for fimo. It used to have handles on each side so that you wouldn't use your hands directly on a blade, even though it's not the sharp end. But the little handles split themselves under even the gentlest pressure, and I still don't really understand what happened, but it did. And now it's just a blade. You just have to kind of put these pieces in here, and even though it looks kind of janky right now, it's going to come together in the end after you've baked it and you've done the glazing and everything. Because right now they kind of look like little orange potatoes, but they're not going to keep looking like that. So stay tuned for the finished product. So at this point, my phone's camera just crapped out for a little bit, and that's why it didn't capture me finishing up the pie details. But essentially what I did is that I filled up the crust and I kind of squished it together to make the filling look soft instead of rigid and uncooked. And then I also did a little bit of detailing anywhere that I could find where I felt like it needed more texture. I took this tool that also has a wire brush on it, and I used that to make extra texture in the crust. And then I've also cut out the little slice here, like I did with my cherry pie. So now it's ready for the oven. I'm going to put it in for at least 20 minutes at 100 degrees Celsius. I always lowball it a little bit compared to what it says on the packages. I think it usually says you have to bake them at 110 or 120 degrees, but I lowball them because I want to avoid bubbling, so I bake the pieces for longer to compensate. But really I'm just going to need this to be half baked before I can proceed, because I just have to, make it hard enough for me to do the paint work. While the pie is getting baked, I want to make the little lattice roof pieces I'm going to put on afterwards. So I have the rest of the crust here, and I'm just going to roll it out slightly more thinly because you're going to want it to look very delicate and elegant. Once you've come to a thickness that is really nice and thin like this, then you're going to have to cut some pretty long strips. So get your knife scalpel out again and then just cut these little strips. You're going to need quite a lot of them. Just make sure that they're about the same thickness, all of them. Again, be careful with the blade. Please get a blade with handles on it. Don't do as I do. This is kind of dangerous. You're also going to need some short strips, so just do a bunch of them. The pie is now finished baking the first round. As you can see, it is nice and firm now and all cooled off. Something I also wanted to note before I proceed with the pie is that for the cherry pie, I've put these little hooks here, and I've put them in before the first bake because you have to do it while the clay is still soft. Then you can make them into earrings or keychains, for example. Okay. So what I've got here now is that I need to put a paint wash over the pie to give it more dimension. I'm going for more of a caramelized look, so what I have here is a tiny little jam jar that you might get at a hotel with a bit of water in it. And then I have a few acrylic colors. With a brush, I dig out a little dollop of red, yellow, and brown to mix into the water. Try and make the mixture as homogeneous as possible. In the end, you can have a nice toasty hue here. Depending on the concentration of your wash, you'll need to do layers. And before I start painting, I got a little Kleenex here because I needed to dab off the excess paint with. After doing a layer, I realized I needed to up the concentration of this mix, otherwise it was going to take ages to make a difference. For the cherry pie, I mixed up a very dark blue color with red to make a dark wash instead of this brown wash, by the way. So I give it another 2 layers before it's ready for the glaze. Once the wash has dried a little, I lay down a layer of clay varnish with a clean, dry brush. This is going to make it look like glazed, delicious, enticing pie filling. Now, it technically says for this varnish that you have to wait an hour before you bake it again and seal it. But I found out through accident that it doesn't really make a difference if you just bake it at a low temperature. So I bake mine at 90 degrees Celsius for maybe 20 minutes. Okay, now the pie is out of the oven after its second bake. The glaze is looking pretty good. It could definitely get another layer for extra glossiness if that's what you want. But onto the lattice roof. To do this, I just lay down the strips from earlier, place them in a diamond pattern. Because I modeled the cherry pie on the one from Twin Peaks, I want to do the same for this one. After each layer of strips, I press them into the filling to make the lattice look baked, like it's sunk into the pie. And I'm just going to do a little bit of brushing with the wire brush to make it look a little rougher, because I don't want it to look too smooth and shiny. I want the filling to pop and be the shiny component and have the crust look flaky by comparison. So keep kind of brushing and keep dabbing it to give it some texture. And then all you really need is to bake it one last time for a half hour at least. And because I didn't put a hook in either of these pieces, I'm thinking of later gluing the pie to a brooch pin, and the little slice could maybe become a piece in one of my miniature dioramas. And now we finally roll all the beauty shots in their full HD glory.